Thank you. Do you need us to do microphones?
Let's go back out to California anytime soon.
Look at my calendar. I think we're going to do something in mid-February.
All right, Joel, are you going to join us? Or should we get started?
Yeah.
All right. Welcome, everyone. Today is January 14, 2020. Happy New Year, 6:03. We are starting now on agenda item 2. This is a pre-council workshop. And I just want to stress workshop in that we are going to be talking back and forth. This is not a presentation. It's meant to be interactive. 2020 Legislative Strategy Session with Casey Hill of Red Hill Strategic. Welcome.
Thank you.
Why are you sitting in front of us today?
Because you all hired me, my firm actually, and not here tonight, but representing you as part of my team is 2 other lobbyists by the name of Dave Stewart and Greg Curtis, and then we have a media relations person who works with us too, Mark Walker. Mark is actually, he grew up, born and raised here in Moab, so he knows the area pretty well. And so that group is your team. If you come to the Capitol, which I'm sure you will at some time during the legislative session, you will probably meet all of them depending on what's going on during that day. But you'll find during legislative session that there are a number of different issues happening all at the same time. So having multiple members on the team is really, from my perspective and with my experience, the best way to do it, because there's just no way to be in all the places that we need to be all at once. So, as the mayor said, my name's Casey Hill. My firm is called Red Hill Strategic, and my background in politics actually started on your side of the microphone. I was elected to the Kaysville City Council when I was 23 years old.
Whoa.
Yeah, so
Nice.
It was, I was very involved in politics from the time I was very young. My grandfather was on the city council before me, and so I'd watched him, and my undergraduate degree is in political science, and I saw an opportunity to get involved, ran for office, and was successful in beating a 2-term incumbent. So that was kind of interesting. I remember on election night seeing the returns coming in and thinking to myself, what am I going to do now? Like, I actually won. But that opportunity to work on the city council, as I'm sure you've all experienced, opened my eyes to a lot of new opportunities and experiences. And one of those experiences was to go back to Washington, D.C. and petition some of our federal representatives for help on an infrastructure issue that we had in Kaysville that we needed help with. And this is, depending on how you look at it, I like to say the good old days of earmarks, but this is pre-2005, and the federal government was just re-upping the TIP 2000 Transportation Infrastructure Plan, and what we needed was an infrastructure project, and I got involved working with Senator Bennett and Senator Hatch and Congressman Bishop, and was successful, was kind of the lead. It was really kind of like the rest of the city council looked at me and said, like, sure, you go try and do that. That's not going to work. And I was just naive enough to think it might. And it ended up being successful. We got a $30 million overpass project funded. And that was kind of the first thing that was like, oh, this is pretty cool. It's pretty neat experience for me, and opened my eyes to kind of the other side of government. I was also at the same time figuring out that I didn't love some of what you guys deal with on a daily basis, I'm sure.
It can be difficult.
It can be difficult. And I'm sure, even though you probably don't get a lot of calls on snow removal, you get calls on potholes and loud OHVs and things like that I was just, like, after 4 years, was ready to be done with. And so I didn't run for re-election, but I had my eyes open to something that I really did love, which was kind of the lobbying and that experience. So that led to an opportunity to work for the American Heart Association for a few years, and then the Utah Medical Association for a few more, and then worked for Energy Solutions for some time, and now out on my own for the last year or so, and kind of teaming up with various groups on different issues. And so that's what brings me here to be your representative now. And I think today my responsibility is to kind of report on some of the issues that I see upcoming, some of the things that we're currently under the direction of Joel and Carly already kind of working on, and then get some further direction from you guys on how you want us to proceed. And so, Mayor, I'm open for however you want this format to go, but I'm happy to just kind of start with
Well, let me just say real
conversation.
quickly,
Yeah.
just why I am happy that you're sitting here with us tonight. We definitely, as a council, have discussed wanting to look at better representation on the Hill. And what is very attractive about what you offer is that it is nice that you have Mark Walker on your team, because he was born and raised here, and he can really speak to, Moab, how it's changed in a way that's a very unique voice and an important voice to tell our story to the legislature. Also, Council Casey comes highly recommended by Rachel Otto with the League of Cities and Towns. And Rachel's somebody we really respect.
The
And then
mayor's office.
Huh?
She's with the mayor's office.
No, she's the mayor's office,
Yes.
no longer the league. And then you've also done work on behalf of Park City as well, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
So just, you've got a breadth of experience that I think
Yeah.
fits well with Moab, so thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's great. It's a great opportunity as far as I'm concerned. Moab is a city that I've been to many times as a tourist, and enjoyed being here. And to your point about Mark, Mark was really the one who, reached out to me and said, "Hey, are you aware that Moab's having some challenges, and you ought to be talking to them?" And I was like, "No, not really." So it was really his own advocacy that even caused me to, start thinking about this and really pursuing. I'd run into you guys at the Capitol last year when I was representing Park City on the ban on bans, and so we'd had some conversations there, and that led to me, continuing that discussion with Mark enough that when it sounded like he talked to you and said there was some interest, so I'm glad it all worked out and came together. Because there are some important issues that I think that are facing Moab right now that if we don't act on them, specifically one issue, if we don't act on it, in the next year and a half, there's going to be some significant opportunity and revenue for the city that could be lost. And so, if you don't mind, I'll just kind of lead right in with that. So,
Sounds great.
y'all are familiar with the 0.5% municipality-specific TRT tax. And what the history of this is just that in 1996, the legislature passed legislation that allowed municipalities to create indebtedness using bonding, and it was a 25-year kind of period that was allowed for a city to utilize that optional 0.5%, and that 25 years, if you do the math, is coming due now in 2000. Did I touch something? Okay, sorry. It is coming to an end in 2021, so it's kind of staring us right in the face, and we've got some vehicles that are available to us legislatively right now. There's a piece of legislation that I've already spoken to the sponsor of, your very own Carl Albrecht. Representative Albrecht is running a bill that he's been working on with the counties that has to do with reallocating how they're able to use, or what they're able to use, the restaurant tax, their portion of the restaurant tax for. And their goal there was, I think you all might be familiar with the counties got their hands slapped over utilization of some funding to make improvements to the airport that they used some funds that they technically weren't supposed to have used for that, and so
It was debatable whether or
debatable.
not
Yeah.
it
So
was
sorry. Let me.
like
Yeah.
allowable.
Whether or not that was a allowable use or not, but
Still sort of under debate, I think.
right. So I should be more careful about how I say that. I don't want to get anybody in trouble here. It's still being questioned. So one way to fix that is to fix the statute that's in question, and that's what Representative Albrecht is working on. And it will free up some money for the counties and the restaurant tax to then allow them to use it more freely and effectively in other areas, which will then allow them to. It doesn't change what they can do with TRT, but the idea is they'll be able to have money that they're currently using for TRT, and they can reallocate that and move things around, make better use of it. So that's what that piece of legislation is doing, that Representative Albrecht's working on, and he, in conversations with he and the other groups that are working on it, the Utah Association of Counties, they are willing to let us work on that with them and include our issue as part of it. And our issue is pretty simple. I mean, what we have to accomplish is it's section 5912.353 of state code, and all we're going to do is take away that sunset, and then also make it clear that a municipality, because the other language in there that needs to be changed is that there's language about either it's 25 years or until the indebtedness is paid off. That's the language that is in place.
Indebtedness.
The bond that
Right.
that was utilized for, or that you're using that 0.5% to pay off. So the idea is that we'll have to obviously extend both of those options. Otherwise, just fixing the sunset doesn't necessarily allow you to add additional bonding onto it. So I think we can take care of that without any major concerns. We've talked to House and Senate leadership on this issue, and they've encouraged us to move forward with it. So I'm happy to talk further about that. It's something that I feel fairly confident that we can get done based on the conversations I'm having. I will say that in my conversations on it, that the tourism group that is working with the county, Utah Tourism, that is working specifically with the county on this issue, was really happy to hear that Moab has got a lobbyist, and that you guys are actively engaged in this process, and also encouraged. I think the question that he said is, it would be great if we could sit down and really come up with the answer to the question from Moab's perspective of what is it that Moab is trying to solve, not just in terms of that 0.5, but it's like, what is this money, what is the purpose of what are we going to be bonding for, and those kind of things. I mean, it was just something that he felt was an important question that I think this council needs to be prepared to answer, so that it's not just, because we want revenue, but here are the things that we need revenue for, I think is a critical and hopefully a very easily answerable question. So.
Bless you. Casey.
Yes.
Rachel Stenta, who is our finance director, is sitting behind you. But Rachel, would you mind just coming up next to Lori? You're welcome to join us for just a minute.
Nice to meet you, Casey.
Good to meet you. Thank you.
So I just have a question. The legislation that you're looking to put together in cooperation with UAC, would that open it up to new indebtedness in addition to extending the sunset?
Yes.
So it wouldn't be the
If I didn't say
existing-
that clearly, that's exactly what I meant to say.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, thanks for that. I'm curious, council, as we go through what I think is a list of things for us to discuss tonight, how do you feel about working through this list with a straw whole to each item, so that he feels that he has the confidence to move forward with what he's presenting.
And this list was compiled by,
This was basically conversations I had with Joel and Carly, gave me kind of the broad list.
We've been meeting
Yep.
via telephone or in Salt Lake for
Yep.
about the last 3 or 4 months. And so we've been working on these issues for a little while. So we wanted to get Casey down here to present to you guys what we've been working on, and also so you had an introduction to him prior to the legislature starting and getting things really going along.
Can you maybe just give us 5 minutes at the end in case there's something not on the list that we have a
Absolutely,
hot
and
question
and
about?
I don't know if we maybe want to do that. The things we've been working on for the most part are the TRT extension, which is vital to us, and that's what Casey was just talking about. Obviously, if that expires and we lose that tax revenue, we're not in a situation right now where we can lose any revenue, and I think the ability to extend that debt is easy for us. I mean, we have $74 million in infrastructure shortfall, and if nothing else, we could roll the WRF into it in a way that we could free up our impact fees again. So there's definitely that opportunity, and that shouldn't be a non-issue for us to be able to use it if we can get it extended. And there's several other cities that are in this situation with us, so it's not us going this alone. So we've also talked a lot about a funding board, like a CIB type funding board for a tourism-based economy, where we're having that effect and feeling that effect similar to those that are based off of resources that are being extrapolated in their areas like Vernal and CIB and what they use. We've talked about looking into getting in a CIB for tourism type board set up and getting revenue coming in for infrastructure that way. We've also talked about OHVs and where our OHVs fall in, and we've met with some of the OHV communities within the state a few months ago, and we've been working on that issue, and we've also been working on the overnight accommodation issues with Casey and his team. Greg has been kind of the lead point on that one, and we've been working with them on our representation up there with our overnight accommodations and what we're doing and how we're moving that forward, and been keeping that loop going as we've been processing along through our planning and council process.
And let me just correct, it was Dave, actually.
Oh,
who's
sorry, I
the
apologize.
Lead
That's right.
on that
but aren't
particular
you
piece.
friends
But,
with Adams?
I am, but David is really, that's why he is the lead on that, is David Stewart, the member of our team, is very close with the president.
And so,
we rely on him.
So those are the main issues we've been working on. Obviously, we want to know from you guys if what outside of that list is out there that you really want us to focus on as well. We have more capacity, and if there's something that you guys all want us to move forward on as well, let us know.
And if I could, I'd like just to give you some perspective on each one of those issues, so that I think you need to understand as well what capabilities we have in short-term, long-term, or short-term, medium-term, and long-term kind of things. And so that's probably part of what this conversation needs to entail as well. I mean, I think short-term, being this legislative session, I think TRT extension is something that's very, very realistic, and something that, that's kind of been our main immediate focus. And I don't want to understate the effort as well either. I mean, I'm making it seem as if, yes, I think we can get it done. I do think we can get it done, but it's not without a significant amount of time and effort that it will take, and it's already taken a fair amount of time to just make sure all these things are lined up. I was on, probably my drive down here, probably an hour of that time was spent, talking still about that issue. I mean, it's by no means is it wrapped up and have a perfect bow on it yet or anything else, but we're in the process of, and I'm feeling good. All the right people are saying all the right things right now. That's what I would say. And I also want to, this is a public meeting, and I also want to be cognizant of that as well. I'm not trying to hide anything either, but it's important for me to, we're having conversations with legislators. We're having conversations that are still undecided yet, issues that are still undecided, unvoted on, and everything else. And so I want to make sure that everybody understands that while we've had some good positive statements made in our favor on some of these, that that doesn't indicate that decisions have been made, or that that we should assume that things are already decided. I think there is still a legislative process, and for each one of these bills, there's still a committee hearing in both the House and the Senate, and a floor vote in both the House and the Senate that these bills have to pass before we know the full outcome. So,
But we have a bill and a sponsor,
Yes,
and that's down the field. That's
that's
work.
moving the ball down the field. Yes, it is. And with regard to OHVs, for example, I know that's a significant issue. This is, again, the nice thing about having someone who has family who lives here. And it's one of those things I think until you live here and experience, you really don't have a full grasp on how significant it is. But I think we do have a pretty good understanding of how significant it is. I also would say that the OHV group that we met with, it's critical that you understand that they have a very strong voice at the legislature. And so if I could make a recommendation, I mean, I strongly recommend that your efforts with regard to that group be in a proactive, working together, effort rather than a adversarial one. Just because the reality is that their concerns are legitimate and real in terms of the impact that anything that we do here can potentially, have far-reaching impact in other areas of the state as well. And the fact that they've got, at last count, about 15,000 members in their online community, and they're a very active group at the Capitol, means that, we're going to have to deal with that issue in a way that I think that they're working with us, not against us on. So
Can you tell us which group it is?
There's several.
Yeah, I in my notes, if I had them, I'm sorry I don't have them, but Carly, can you help at all with that? Who was representing?
Brewing is the last name of the
Bud
gentleman.
Brewing.
Bud, yes, and his group is called,
I think it's OHV Utah.
yeah,
His mother is a friend.
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
And I think it's probably worth it for us to say that we are full of outdoor recreation down here. And that is one slice of our outdoor recreation pie. And I know that this council does not want to negatively affect that, that business, those businesses or the individuals. I think that we care a lot about the people that operate those businesses and are in that industry. We want to make sure that they're protected as a one of the ways in which people get out and play in Moab. There's just clear conflict with them being street legal, and it's a conflict that has been noisier than maybe than the machines themselves.
Yeah.
And so we're looking for resolution of some kind where we can continue to celebrate the off-road community and, their recreation typology, while also making sure that we're listening to the residents' concerns about noise and safety in the residential areas of the community.
And
Right.
Mayor and Council, I would give this disclaimer as well. My responsibility is to fight whatever battle you ask me to fight, and I'm happy to do that. I will do that. But I also want you to have a clear understanding of what I believe is winnable. And maybe it's a battle that you understand is not winnable, but it's a battle that you still want fought. That's a different conversation, but it's something that, we should all, I'm willing to have those kind of fights. I've won battles that I didn't think going in that we would win. So I'm not trying to in any way say, that I'm telling you how to do your job. I'm just giving you, this is my piece of advice. This is hopefully a little bit what you pay me for. And so that's my take on that particular issue. I did have, as I mentioned, one of the conversations that I had with the Utah tourism industry lobbyist. He is well aware of this issue, and basically said, look, I think there are, in his mind, there are ways that we could potentially work together to address that. And none of them had to do with specifically changing the entirety of state law, but there are resort communities that are already designated in state law, and he was just kind of spitballing ideas, but I think he felt like there's still potentially a way to move forward on this issue and attempt to make some changes that might be meaningful to your community. But the reality is that if we were talking about short-term, medium-term, and long-term, this is one of those medium-term issues. I mean, it's not ready today for us to run legislation on. We don't have the capability to just throw a piece of legislation up there and have any likelihood of success with the OHV group and the amount of kind of legislative involvement and legislator involvement that they have.
So I think there's a bill to eliminate the off-highway tag out-of-state reciprocity.
Okay.
I was just curious if you were familiar with that and had a sense of its chances.
I'm not. I'm not aware of that. I'd be happy to. A lot of times you can just tell a lot by who the sponsor is. Do you happen to know any of that? Okay. I'm happy to do some homework on that and report back to you on that. Within the next day or two. I mean, I can easily figure that out.
So Casey, I got a question for you. So speaking for myself, I don't care about off-road vehicles being in town. What I care about, it's all about noise, right? So why would the people who would fight any efforts that we would have to make things, suppose vehicles just by relatively inexpensive change out of mufflers, for example, could be made 10 dB quieter, right? It's not a big deal. It's doable, I think. But why would the groups fight it?
I'm not sure why they feel as strongly as they do about it. I can tell you that in the meeting that we had with them, there were a number of ideas brought up, and they were very opposed to any idea of requiring them to modify their machines.
That's absurd,
anyway.
Casey. I mean, that's the point I would say. I mean, we have a very good reason for wanting to do it. If you lived here and listened to it day in and day out in the summertime, as we all do, they would understand.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the point is, I'm not trying to, I have friends, neighbors who own businesses down here. It's fine. I don't mind them. I'm all too happy to have them. I just want them quieter. That's a pretty modest thing to ask for, and I think that's something that as an approach I'd like to see us pursue anyway, just focus on the noise. And it's objectively quantifiable. You can do it with an easy, cheap noise meter. And I believe Salt Lake County, for example, I remember reading an ordinance out there that as a model for what could be employed about how it might be enforced. It's not hard to do. It just there's no political will to do it right now, other than ourselves.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. I mean, I wish I could give you a better
Well,
answer.
I think I know what the answer is,
Yeah.
Casey. I mean, you know why? I think people love the freaking noise, all right? I mean, man, it makes you feel like a real man. I can't stand it, all right?
Yeah.
Because, all right, get over it.
Councilman, I'm on your side on this, obviously. And I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying it's not an issue that we can't address. I'm telling you that in the short term, that's not something that I would recommend we take on. I think that we'd be much better to work together to build a coalition, work with the League of Cities and Towns, work with other resort communities that might be affected in a similar way, and attempt to go back once we have a coalition. Moab City standing alone, taking on this issue. We can do it, but it will not end. It will not end with success in this legislative session. I think I'm very comfortable with that assessment.
I think we have to address their perception, and this comes from my family and my friends that come down here as tourists and bring their toys and ride them. why do you hate us? You hate us. You hate the way that we recreate. And family reunions are great fun, let me tell you.
We heard a lot of that, didn't we, in the OHV meeting?
But
Yeah.
we have got to address the fact that we do not hate them.
Yeah.
And we don't hate how they recreate. Their choice of recreation makes some of our neighborhoods very noisy.
Yep.
And we've entertained bringing some of the legislators down during those busy weeks, not to go have fun, but to sit in our backyards and listen to what we listen to.
And I think that would be a great, first effort on doing that. I mean, that's something that I think is realistic and something we could probably succeed in doing if given, a few months lead time. I think we could succeed in getting legislators here.
Bring them in April.
Good. April's actually a great month because April's a month where they don't have other meetings. They take, legislative session goes the end of January, all of February, and the first 2 weeks of March, and they take obviously the rest of March and the month of April off from any formal legislative meetings. So April is a good month to do that. So if that's something you really would like us to do, council and mayor, then that's something we should start on right now because we do need to get on their schedules.
April is generally Jeep Safari and Rally on the Rocks, which are just two really, really busy events.
Okay.
Well, I kind of like to have an overall strategy, maybe a game plan that's part of, so that if we make the effort, then it'll fit in.
What's the next phase of that? Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a thought process to it. I think that's a good point.
I mean, it is in your name. Strategy.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you. Yes, and
Strategic.
yeah, to that, I guess to that point, if that is the step that you'd like us to take, like I said, we can, if that is the next thing on the list, priority-wise, then for sure, I think we ought to begin that process, and having those conversations with legislators. But probably the first place I would start talking about strategy would be meeting with the tourism industry and reaching out and attempting to find partners to work on that issue together with us. The legislator piece of it is important, but I think that it's the second piece in determining whether or not it's feasible to really do something that's going to really be significant in terms of making a difference. Obviously, there are things that I think the city can do that in our conversations with the OHV group, I'm not sure how meaningful they would be. I'm not sure how helpful they would be, but
Let's be sure too that even within that community, there is a diversity of opinions about, levels of street legal and the law.
yeah.
So like having a strategy and making sure that all voices, even within that recreation group, are heard, I think would be helpful. We learned a lot, I think, as a council when OHVs were, there was that moment of OHVs were going to be allowed in arches, and a lot of people spoke out from that community in favor, but there were those in that community that also spoke out in opposition to it. So I think listening not just to the voices, there are unlikely voices as well. So in the off chance that there was legislation that we all kind of mostly agreed on, and there was a sponsor, and it was like an amendment, is that something that's a possibility for this legislative session, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a, not to confuse the issue, but there's a vehicle to attach ourselves to, then yeah, that's definitely something that we can do. You obviously, there's two ways to do that. One is you try and hijack the process of what's moving forward. The other is you go to that that individual and ask for permission to amend their bill. The challenge is that unless all the OHV groups and everybody else that are on board, you're basically asking that person to bring a significant amount of opposition onto a bill that they obviously had some other intention for, or some other goal specifically for. So, but it's as simple as finding a piece of legislation that's dealing with the same area of the statute that we would be needing to work through. So that part of it is less challenging than still the part where you go and convince someone that, hey, you know that piece of legislation that you've got that you like, we want to add something to it that might create the possibility that it becomes extremely challenging for you to succeed in passing.
One other thing that we've talked about is curfews, just this idea of a curfew. So it's just a limit of when. That's something that's been talked about with tour operators and hasn't been a big no. Was that something that you talked about when you were?
We did talk to them about it. I don't remember exactly what their response was on curfews because I do remember that there was a long conversation about the fact that there are actually some night rides that they're specifically a big part of the event that they felt like was just, they couldn't live without. But I don't know if there's anything else.
They pushed pretty hard against that.
Okay.
They were
They want
much.
to keep the heat too, so they like
That
going
was
at
the
night.
other reason, was like when they come down, and that was the argument, was that when they came down in July and August, they like to go on the night rides because it's not 110 degrees out on the rock. But that said, when that came up, they weren't opposed to designated routes in those scenarios. That's where the designated routes really, I felt, got traction, because they did acknowledge that they didn't want them riding past their house at 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. And
And
so
where did trailering come into?
it didn't.
Does-
Not because we didn't try and bring it up, but it is for them, it's a no.
Well, I mean, every other,
No
not
go.
every other state, but most, I mean, even our neighboring state of Colorado doesn't, you have to trailer your ATV, so.
Yeah.
And there's lots of ATV users over there as well. I mean, it's just a matter of trying to,
I
and
agree.
again, it's that carve out for the resort communities, because with that,
Yeah. That's
piece of information that was coming out with Arches, Springdale, Torrey, they were all, I was in discussion with them, and they're also in support of what's happening in their communities.
I think what was clear when we met with them was, trying to think back, there was about 12 individuals there, and there was about 8 different organizations. I mean, the difference between us and them is they are highly unified and highly organized, and we kind of stand alone. Springdale's kind of out on its own. Like, we need to spend some time really getting the other resort communities and those who are having the impact from this together as well, so we have one common voice to try and, not like Tawny was saying, not go against them or try and strike them down, but to try and find a balance. Because right now, we don't have a lot of leverage and we don't have a lot of weight on this issue. And a lot of it is because we're standing alone. So it is going to take some time to build a coalition on this to try and get some concessions that would make our lives more tolerable.
Should we move on to overnight accommodations?
Yeah.
And you spoke on the CIB, this creation of this tourism board and us being in favor of that. Did we need to talk about that anymore other than?
No, we're aware of it, and
happening?
it's something that we have on the kind of the longer term effort. I mean, that's going to be, a conversation that we'll be working with legislators on over the summer, and trying to find someone who will be a champion for us on that issue. I think it's a good issue. I think it's something that makes sense, and I think that I think we can get traction with it. But it's something that's going to we've got to do some work to build and find all of those communities that would be impacted positively by something like that, and that would be interested in helping carry forward that effort.
Can I just ask, would that look like a tax on recreation? I mean, how does that,
So, I mean,
Another
there's
tax?
currently a fund for mineral extraction that is set aside, so there's a, like if your community is, heavily impacted by mineral extraction or something like that, you have an option to assess a tax. And it would be something similar to that. If your community is heavily impacted by tourism, you'd have to come up with some, determination as to what.
something different than a TRT?
No, not
Or a
necessarily.
ta-
I mean, it just,
It's different, it's different in function.
right.
It's same idea, different in function. CIB, the way CIB works is those communities that are impacted by the extraction of the minerals, they then have access to that money, and it is restricted into what they can use it for, but they have access to that as the form of grants. They then also have the ability to take that money and loan it to other communities who aren't members of the extraction communities at low interest loans. So communities that are all the way on the west side of the state who are nowhere near the oil fields of Vernal can go to the CIB and seek a loan to build a brand new public works facility at 2% interest instead of 5% interest, and that's the benefit to the other members of the state that aren't included in that industry because they can get low interest loans. Those communities that are the 16, 17, 18 high resort communities would have access to those funds, and they may be limited to building different sewer water building projects that we would have for infrastructure, but we could get that as in the form of grants coming out of that pool and not as loans. And we could even get loans and half loan, half grant. It works just like CIB does, but it would come out of the tourist-based economies, those resort communities that could then help other communities in the state that aren't tourist through loans that would generate more revenue for us to use towards more infrastructure. So we'd set it up in the same form as the CIB. It would just, instead of being mineral extraction, it would be tourist-based economy.
Yeah, so Joel, I think this idea may date back to Mr. Everett, or maybe yourself had a hand in it.
It was David who started this, yeah.
Yeah. So one critical difference is that the CIB, in terms of industrial extraction, is a external, if you will, source of funding, whereas here, as I understood it from David, Moab and Park City and whoever else wished to participate would have to pool their existing TRT revenues and
This would be outside of,
loan them out or give them to some other entity if they felt like that was in their best interest to do so, in the hopes that sooner or later they would receive funding. In other words, if in one particular year Moab got a certain amount of TRT taxes, they could.
I want to be clear, Councilman, that this is not TRT money. This is a new separate revenue source.
But where's the revenue source coming from?
It would be a separate new tax associated with the tourist industry.
So
Separate
it could be
new
like
tax.
the guiding services or outfitters, okay.
Everyone.
So it's a brand new tax. That's the
Yes.
difference.
Like a 0.5% or something, whatever.
Whatever they calculate the rate. But then the loaning of that money comes from when you build your pool up and you can loan it out to other communities, so they get low interest loans, so it benefits other members of the state.
Oh, I understand all that. I just didn't know where the money was coming from.
Yeah,
So
okay.
So we have 10 minutes
Yeah.
and we have overnight accommodations, so.
Okay,
think
well,
we
and I
should-
was going to say, the overnight accommodations, I think I can answer that fairly quickly. We've had conversations with the president of the Senate, who was the one who had raised some concerns on that issue. The easy, quick report is that I think those concerns have been answered and dealt with. I think, Mayor, you've had some conversations with President Adams. He feels like his concerns were addressed. So I don't know how much more we need to spend, addressing or dealing with that issue, other than just to say that I think that fire, if there was one, has been effectively kind of put out, and I'm feeling
Let's go with controlled.
controlled. Okay.
Not out yet.
Okay.
Well, it is important to report back, through you, that we are working very hard to listen to our community members, understand, how to deal with the unintended consequences of this, the blessing that we have of, tourism in Moab, and yet get organized. And what I respect about President Adams is that he understands that, land use code is where we do that. And so this council has worked so hard and has it on our agenda tonight. Planning Commission has worked very hard to to deal with that. So please report back.
I
that
will.
we're still working on the issue, and we're doing it through land use. And and this council and our planning commission is still working very hard on it,
I will do that.
which is what he asked us to do.
Yes, yeah. An important thing to remember or realize is that President Adams, before he's President Adams, was also City Councilman Adams and was also Planning Commission member Adams in Layton City. Our friendship, he and I, our relationship goes back to when I was on the Kaysville City Council. He was on the Layton City Council. So he understands a lot of the challenges that you're facing, and is not just, he's not blind to those issues. Can I just report on a few more things that I do think would be important for you to know? Inland port litigation, while you think, well, how does that affect us? It would be important for you to understand that just recently, Salt Lake City basically at the district court level lost on every way that they could have possibly lose on that issue. The reason it's significant is that, and Greg Curtis, a member of our team, has already kind of carried this concern to Salt Lake City, basically just saying, look, if you pursue appeal, which they will, but if they continue to pursue appeal and it were to go and continue and lose in the way that they have, the challenge is that it could create a more open pathway for the legislature to step in on other issues where they argue that there's a compelling state interest, which is what they argued on the inland port issue. And so it's something that as you attend League of Cities and Towns meetings and as you have these discussions, to realize that, that the decisions with particularly that court case could have far-reaching impacts because it could empower the legislature to feel like, okay, in every instance where they disagree with something that a city council is doing, if there's a compelling state interest for them to step in, it could open the path for them to do that. So just something to keep in mind and something to kind of be aware of, and encourage Salt Lake City to be careful as they proceed in order to not establish too significant of a clear pathway for the legislature. And then the last thing on tax reform, as you're all probably well aware of, the legislature passed tax reform in special session at the end of December. There were at different points resort community tax, sales distribution conversations that came up, sales tax distribution that came up. We don't see that the legislature intends to do anything more on that particular issue. We're not hearing anything. If they do something with tax reform, my guess is it's going to be to tweak kind of what they've already done and attempt to try and find maybe some answers to some of the pushback that they've been receiving over the last few weeks since they passed that reform in December. So we're keeping our ear to the ground and making sure that we don't hear anything or we don't see anything moving on that, but that's not a major point of concern for us right now.
Can you just comment for our residents, because I think some of them definitely would have the concern about the tax on food. I think there are a lot of concerns in the community about that. I mean, some services too, but really food. And do you anticipate more discussion on that, or you think that's a done deal? I think people are just trying to know how they're supposed to prepare themselves.
Yeah, I think the legislature is currently in the mode of waiting to see how the referendum effort proceeds, whether or not the referendum is successful in getting the number of signatures necessary. But yeah, beyond that, it would only be me totally guessing as to what I think they may or may not do. I think it'll be interesting to see whether or not the referendum succeeds. I think there is obviously a significant amount of pressure that legislators are feeling from that decision and pushback from constituents. And I think that you'll also see that as Utah's coming into the Republican primary season, and you're seeing a lot of interest and a number of different people jumping into the Republican gubernatorial election. It's quite possible that will continue to be an issue. So I don't think it's going away, and I think the legislature's going to to have a significant amount of pressure applied. But in terms of what they'll do with that, I really am not, I wouldn't even venture a guess. I think that if the referendum succeeds, that I would be surprised if the referendum so just to, you understand really quickly, the referendum, what it does is it puts what the legislature did on the ballot in November. It doesn't actually repeal what the legislature did in December. So it would create a real challenge for the legislature in the upcoming legislative session in order, to determine budget. If you can imagine, you're trying to do a budget when come November, the budget could drastically change based on, whether or not the referendum or the vote on the referendum, however that went. So I think it does have the challenge and the impact that it will create a ton of uncertainty. If the referendum is successful and gets the number of signatures needed, you'll probably see the legislature pass a very, very limited, similar to what they did last year, but even maybe more so, what they call a skinny budget, which will just basically deal with basic services, and they'll have to wait and see in November before they do anything significant with the budget. So that's a significant challenge, because there are things that that affect the city and this entire state that are tied up in that budget. And if that budget becomes a skinny budget, it can affect us all.
And I don't want to cut you off from your list, but I just want to mention some quick things, because I don't know if they're concerns for anyone else, but it seems like we always have ongoing concerns about anything that's taking away local control for our community, whether it's land use planning or, especially we have a lot of concerns right now with water. So I would say those are, anything that comes up that has to do with those are big ones for me. I didn't know if the efforts to potentially have more flexibility with TRT had died, just because that was an interest to our colleagues at the county, just to have some more flexibility, potentially spend that on more things like housing.
So the way they're dealing
Yeah.
with that is through the restaurant tax.
Okay.
And adjusting the way that
Okay,
the
so what you
flexibility
talked
they
about
have
earlier.
there,
Yeah.
but they won't be adjusting what flexibility they have with TRT.
Okay, and then I was just gonna mention, I sit on a county board that has to do with EMS in our county, and I didn't know if you needed to know, because maybe more on the county end, but it's my understanding that they're working with fire professionals on potential legislation that would, I'm a little bit confused, so it's probably better if you look it up, because I guess now there's nothing in the state that requires communities to have EMS services, and so this would address some of that. I can send you just the draft that I have, but it just seems like, and again, it might be something the county's watching more, but it seemed important to rural communities.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested to find out more about that. I've heard rumors of that. I actually attended a meeting with rural EMS about 3-4 months ago, where they were addressing or talking about a lot of those concerns, and they were talking about legislation, but I haven't heard anything since then, so. I know we're right there.
How many
Mayor.
days are we away from the start of the legislative session?
16?
16 days away.
Yeah. It's January 27th is the start of legislative session. And so the last Monday in January through the second Thursday in March, 45 days, and basically, from that time, from the start of session, if you all are interested in coming up, just give me a few hours heads up that you're going to be around. I'm happy to facilitate any meetings and help make it as productive a time as possible when you're there. And certainly there will be, as we pursue this one TRT extension issue, there will be opportunities where I would like and need your help to come speak to the issue with legislators if we get stuck on anything. If we don't, I won't waste your time. I promise. I know you guys are busy. I know you have responsibilities here.
And you
for this
understand the
community.
commute.
Yes, I do. I just, yeah.
Now, are you really driving home tonight?
I plan to. I'm hoping to. So if you don't mind, and don't feel like it's rude if I get out of here as soon as I can, I'd still like to get home
That's
if
all right.
possible tonight.
Well, we're at a good time for stopping right now. Thank
Okay.
you so much for joining us. We'll take just 3 minutes to break, and then we'll reconvene at 7.
Thank you, Mayor.